The look on Rebecca's face was worth every silent year I'd spent building my empire in the shadows. There she stood, in her designer blazer and perfectly styled hair, mouth hanging open as the company-wide email announced me as the new CEO and majority shareholder. The same woman who had snickered at my sensible sedan just last Christmas dinner, who had pulled my nephew aside to whisper about my depressing little apartment, who had asked my brother within my earshot if I was ever going to get my life together at 53. That woman now realized she'd been judging the very person who controlled her professional fate. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Imogen Finchley, and for most of my adult life, people have underestimated me. That's been my secret weapon. I grew up in Millfield, a small manufacturing town where practical skills were valued more than dreams. My father worked at the local textile factory for 40 years, coming home with calloused hands and tired eyes, while my mother stretched his modest paycheck into meals, clothes, and occasional small luxuries for their 3 children. I was the middle child, sandwiched between my older brother Marcus and younger sister Eleanor. My parents taught us the value of hard work and frugality, lessons I took to heart while my siblings seemed to absorb only partially. From an early age, I understood something fundamental that Marcus and Eleanor never quite grasped. True wealth isn't about displaying prosperity. It's about building it quietly, patiently, brick by brick. After graduating with a business degree that I earned through scholarships and weekend jobs, I secured an entry-level position at Horizon Dynamics, a mid-sized marketing firm. The pay was modest, but the potential was unlimited for someone willing to work twice as hard as everyone else. While my peers spent their 20s chasing promotions through office politics and flashy presentations, I focused on understanding the company from the ground up, learning every department, process, and pain point. Marcus, meanwhile, married Rebecca Harrington when I was 32. She came from a family that valued appearances above all else. From our first meeting, Rebecca made it clear she found our family quaint and provincial. She would compliment my mother's home-cooked meals with a hint of condescension. "This is so authentic. You never get food like this in the circles I usually move in." My parents, eager to welcome her into the family, overlooked these subtle jabs, but I noticed every single one. As years passed, our paths diverged further. Marcus and Rebecca moved into an oversized colonial in the suburbs, financed with a mortgage that made my accountant's heart ache. They leased luxury cars they couldn't afford, enrolled their children in expensive private schools, and took lavish vacations documented meticulously on social media. Eleanor followed a similar pattern with her husband, though on a slightly less extravagant scale. I, on the other hand, lived in what Rebecca once called my cozy little starter apartment, though I'd been there for 15 years. I drove a reliable Honda that I maintained impeccably. I bought quality clothes that lasted years rather than following trends. I brown-bagged my lunch when colleagues ordered delivery. I invested consistently, living well below my means even as my salary grew with promotions. At family gatherings, my lifestyle became something of a running joke. "Still driving that old car, Imogen?" Marcus would ask, car keys to his BMW dangling ostentatiously from his finger. "You know, you're allowed to enjoy your money sometimes." Rebecca was less gentle. "Don't you get depressed coming home to that empty apartment every night? No husband, no kids, not even a proper dining room to entertain in? What exactly are you saving for? The afterlife?" I would smile and change the subject. They didn't need to know that by 40, I had accumulated enough in investments to retire comfortably if I chose to. They didn't need to know that I was spending my empty evenings taking advanced finance courses and studying market trends. They certainly didn't need to know that I had begun quietly purchasing shares in Horizon Dynamics when the company went public. The real turning point came 7 years ago. After nearly 2 decades of dedicated service at Horizon, I had risen to become Chief Operating Officer. I understood the company's operations better than anyone, including the founding CEO, Martin Blackwell, who had grown complacent and was increasingly disengaged from day-to-day operations. Martin's retirement created a vacuum that the board scrambled to fill. They brought in an outside CEO, Dominic Keller, a charismatic figure from a larger firm who talked impressively, but understood little about our specific market position or company culture. Within 18 months, he had made a series of catastrophic decisions, alienating key clients and demoralizing staff. As the share price plummeted, I continued buying, recognizing the company's fundamental value remained strong, despite Dominic's mismanagement. When he was finally ousted, the board appointed me interim CEO while they conducted an external search for a permanent replacement. This was my moment. I presented a comprehensive recovery strategy so meticulous and well-reasoned that the board postponed their search to give me 6 months to implement it. 6 months became a year, and the company not only stabilized but began to thrive again. By this point, between my stock options and my personal investments, I had accumulated a substantial ownership stake in Horizon. Working with a small group of like-minded board members and investors, I orchestrated a restructuring that consolidated my position. To the outside world, including my family, I was simply a dedicated executive who had finally gotten her due recognition. They had no idea I was now effectively controlling the company. Which brings me to Rebecca. About 3 years ago, she found herself between opportunities after being let go from her position at a luxury real estate agency. Sales had slowed, the market had shifted, and Rebecca, who had built her personal brand on being associated with only the most exclusive properties, was suddenly struggling to make commissions. At a family dinner, while picking at my mother's homemade lasagna, which she claimed was a bit heavy on the carbs, Rebecca announced she was looking for a little something to tide her over. "The real estate market always bounces back," she said confidently. "I just need something dignified to occupy my time until things pick up again." My brother looked uncomfortable. I later learned they had remortgaged their house to maintain their lifestyle during Rebecca's temporary unemployment, which had stretched to 8 months. "What kind of position are you looking for?" I asked innocently. Rebecca waved her hand dismissively. "Oh, something in marketing or client relations. With my connections and experience, I should have my pick of opportunities." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Though I won't consider anything beneath director level, obviously. I nodded thoughtfully. "Horizon is expanding our client relations department. I could put in a word." Rebecca's expression was a mixture of surprise and barely concealed disdain. "Horizon? That's very kind of you, Imogene, but I was thinking of something more prestigious." My mother interjected, "Rebecca, dear, Horizon Dynamics is one of the largest marketing firms in the region now. They've even opened international offices." Rebecca looked genuinely surprised. "Really? Well, I suppose I could consider it, though I'd want to speak directly with whoever's in charge of hiring. No offense, Imogene, but I'd need to be sure. The position is at the appropriate level for someone of my caliber." I smiled. "Of course. I'll have HR reach out to you." 2 weeks later, Rebecca interviewed with our HR director and the head of client relations. Despite her overconfidence and underwhelming portfolio, we did have a position that could benefit from her social connections. She was offered a mid-level role, not the directorship she felt entitled to, but a respectable position with good compensation. She accepted, though I heard through office channels that she had complained about the step down. For the next 2 years, Rebecca remained blissfully unaware that I was anything more than a senior executive at the company. My ownership stake was held through investment vehicles and trusts that obscured my personal connection. As CEO, I maintained a relatively low profile externally, focusing on operations rather than being the public face of the company. At work, Rebecca and I rarely crossed paths. She worked in a different department and a different building. When we did encounter each other at company events, she would acknowledge me with the minimal courtesy required of a family connection, before gravitating toward executives she perceived as more influential. Outside of work, at family gatherings, her condescension continued unabated. If anything, her position at Horizon gave her new material. "The executive suite is absolutely stunning," she would tell my parents, as if I wouldn't know. Of course, Imogene's offices are in the operations building. It's functional. The way she said functional made it sound like a euphemism for depressing. Last Thanksgiving, she cornered me while I was helping my mother in the kitchen. "I've been meaning to talk to you about your wardrobe, Imogene," she said in a hushed tone. "Now that you're representing Horizon 2, you might want to consider upgrading a bit. First impressions matter so much in our industry." I looked down at my simple but well-made dress. This has served me well for years. "That's exactly my point," she said with an exaggerated wince. "Years. I know money must be tight on your salary level, but consider it an investment in your future. I could recommend some shops that have decent options that won't break the bank." I thanked her for her concern and returned to mashing potatoes with perhaps unnecessary vigor. The Christmas gathering at Marcus and Rebecca's house was the final straw. They had recently completed an expensive renovation that had stretched their finances even thinner. Rebecca spent the entire evening guiding guests through each over-designed room, pointing out imported fixtures and custom features. When she noticed me admiring a painting in their entryway, she sidled up and murmured, "It's an original, of course. I know it's probably hard to tell the difference when you're used to prints, but once you've lived with real art, there's no going back." Later, when conversations turned to upcoming plans, I mentioned I was considering finally taking a trip to Japan in the spring, a country I had long wanted to visit. Rebecca's eyebrows shot up. "Japan? How adventurous of you. Though if you're concerned about costs, there are some lovely all-inclusive resorts in Mexico that run great specials in the off-season, much more budget-friendly." As the evening wore on, I overheard her talking to my nephew. "Your Aunt Imogene has different priorities," she was saying. "Some people focus on experiences rather than things, on saving rather than living. It's admirable in its way. Though between us, I've always felt life's too short to deny yourself comfort." My nephew, 17 and impressionable, nodded sagely as if receiving profound wisdom. That night, as I drove home in my practical Honda, something shifted inside me. I had always believed that my financial choices were private, that the satisfaction of building wealth quietly was enough. But watching Rebecca instill her materialistic values in the next generation of our family, that was something I couldn't ignore. The next morning, I called an emergency board meeting. It was time for Horizon Dynamics to announce its new organizational structure publicly, including clarifying the ownership stakes that had been deliberately kept discreet. It was time for me to step fully into the spotlight as not just the CEO, but the controlling shareholder of a company now valued at over $300 million. The announcement was set for January 15th, just after the holiday break, when all employees would be back in the office. The communication plan was meticulous. A company-wide email would go out at 9 a.m., followed by department meetings and a town hall at noon. I specifically requested that all client relations personnel be gathered in the main conference room at 9:15 for a special briefing by the executive team. I wanted to be there in person when Rebecca read the email. That morning, I broke my usual habit of arriving at the office by 7:30. Instead, I timed my entrance to the main conference room for precisely 9:20, 5 minutes after the client relations team would have assembled, 20 minutes after the announcement email would have landed in everyone's inbox. When I walked in, the room fell silent. 20 pairs of eyes turned toward me, but I only cared about one set. Rebecca was seated halfway down the long table, her face drained of color as she stared at her open laptop, then at me, then back at her laptop. "Good morning, everyone," I said calmly. "I imagine you've all had a chance to read today's announcement. I wanted to meet with this department personally because client relationships are at the heart of our growth strategy moving forward." As I spoke about vision and opportunities, Rebecca remained frozen. The colleague seated near her glanced uncomfortably between us, clearly aware of our family connection and sensing the tension. After the meeting, as people filed out, Rebecca remained seated, seemingly unable to move. When the room had emptied, except for us, she finally closed her laptop and looked up at me. "How long?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "How long have I been CEO? Or how long have I been the principal owner of Horizon?" I asked. "Both," she said. "I've been CEO for 6 years. As for ownership, I began investing in Horizon stock 20 years ago. I became the largest individual shareholder about 5 years ago." Rebecca swallowed hard. "And you never said anything. All those times you sat at our dinner table listening to me talk about my job, about the executives, about my dated wardrobe, my sensible car, my depressing apartment." I added softly. She had the grace to flush. "I didn't mean—" "Yes, you did," I interrupted. "You meant every word. You've spent years judging me for choices you didn't understand, making assumptions about my finances, my happiness, my worth, all based on what you could see on the surface." Rebecca stared at her hands. "Are you going to fire me?" The question surprised me. "Why would I fire you? By all accounts, you're competent at your job." "But I've been condescending? Dismissive?" "Yes, you have. But I don't make business decisions based on personal feelings." I gathered my papers and headed toward the door, then paused. "That's another difference between us, Rebecca. You've always confused appearances with reality, possessions with worth. I own this company not because I wanted to impress people, but because I believed in its value and was willing to invest when others weren't." I left her sitting there, understanding for the first time that the woman she had pitied for her cheap lifestyle controlled not just her employment, but a significant enterprise valued at hundreds of millions. Word spread quickly through the family. My phone lit up with messages, first from Marcus, then Eleanor, then my parents. Their reactions ranged from shocked to apologetic to defensive. Marcus and I met for coffee a few days later. He seemed genuinely humbled. "I had no idea. Imogene, all these years we thought." "I know what you thought," I said. "That's precisely why I never corrected you. But why live so modestly when you didn't have to?" I considered my answer carefully. I do live exactly as I want to. My apartment is the perfect size. For me, any larger would feel wasteful. My car is reliable and comfortable. My clothes are well-made and appropriate. The difference is that these choices were made consciously, not out of limitation. He nodded slowly, though I could tell he didn't fully understand. As for Rebecca, our professional relationship remains strictly professional. At family gatherings, there's a new respect in her manner, though I sometimes catch her looking at me with confusion, still trying to reconcile the Imogene she thought she knew with the reality. I did make one visible change after the announcement. I finally took that trip to Japan, not the budget tour Rebecca might have imagined, but a month-long exploration with private guides, exquisite accommodations, and experiences that money alone couldn't buy. I brought back thoughtful gifts for everyone, including a delicate hand-painted silk scarf for Rebecca that I had commissioned from an artist in Kyoto. When I gave it to her, she examined the fine craftsmanship with genuine appreciation. "It's beautiful," she said quietly. "Thank you." "The artist has been perfecting her technique for 40 years, I told her. She lives simply in a small traditional house, owns few possessions, and is considered a national treasure. Value, Rebecca, is rarely visible on the surface. The Lesson wasn't lost on her. Last week, I overheard her telling a friend on the phone that she and Marcus were reassessing their priorities and considering downsizing to a more manageable home. Small steps, perhaps, but meaningful ones. As for me, I continue to drive my sensible car to my comfortable apartment, where I enjoy my quiet evenings exactly as I always have. The only difference is that now, when people ask what I do for a living, I answer truthfully. I own a company. The look on their faces is almost as satisfying as the look on Rebecca's face was that day in the conference room. Almost, but not quite. The reality of what I had built remained my closely guarded secret for years. Even as Horizon Dynamics expanded beyond our original offices into a sprawling campus on the edge of Millfield, I maintained my modest lifestyle. My apartment, the same one Rebecca had dismissively called a starter home, was a 15-minute walk from our headquarters. Some mornings, I'd stroll through Eastwood Park, stopping to feed the ducks before continuing to the glass-fronted building where hundreds of employees now worked. People often underestimate the power of consistency. While others chased trends and status, I followed a steady path. Every month for 20 years, I invested a fixed percentage of my income. I learned early that wealth isn't built through grand gestures but through patient accumulation, drop by drop, like water shaping stone over time. After my confrontation with Rebecca in the conference room, subtle shifts began throughout my extended family. The first came from my younger sister Eleanor. Unlike Marcus and Rebecca, who projected an image of success that exceeded their actual financial situation, Eleanor and her husband Todd had more modest aspirations, but still subscribed to the belief that visible consumption equaled achievement. 3 weeks after the company-wide announcement, Eleanor invited me to lunch at Bellini's, an overpriced Italian restaurant downtown that she normally reserved for special occasions. When I arrived, she was already seated, fidgeting with her napkin. "I ordered you sparkling water," she said as I sat down. "I know you don't drink at lunch." "Thank you," I said, noting this small but significant acknowledgement of my preferences, something my siblings rarely bothered with before. Eleanor studied the menu with unusual intensity before finally setting it aside with a sigh. "I owe you an apology, Imogene. I've been unkind about your choices." I raised an eyebrow, but remained silent. "All those times I teased you about your retirement fund when you declined weekend shopping trips, or when I suggested you were depriving yourself of enjoyment." She shook her head. "I was projecting my own insecurities. The truth is, Todd and I are drowning in debt." This didn't surprise me, but her willingness to admit it did. Eleanor had always maintained a facade of effortless prosperity. Credit, cards, the mortgage, the kids' private school tuition. She twisted her wedding ring, a recent upgrade I suspected they couldn't afford. "We're one financial emergency away from disaster, and here you are, quietly building an empire while—" "I mocked your sensible shoes." "I never took offense," I said, which wasn't entirely true, but seemed kinder than admitting how deeply some of her comments had stung over the years. "That's because you're better than me," Eleanor said, her eyes welling with tears. "I've been so focused on looking successful that I never bothered to actually become successful." I reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "It's not too late to make changes." And so began my unexpected role as the family's financial advisor. Eleanor and Todd came to my apartment the following Saturday, the first time either had visited in years. They brought their complete financial records, laying bare the extent of their precarious situation. Credit card debt at 24% interest, a mortgage they had refinanced twice to pull out equity for renovations and vacations, car payments stretching another 4 years, private school, tuition they could barely afford. I cleared my dining table, a solid oak piece I'd purchased 20 years ago from an estate sale, and refinished myself, and spread out their documents. For hours, we worked through their finances, creating a realistic budget and debt reduction plan. It wouldn't be easy or quick, but it was possible to right their ship before it sank entirely. The first step is to be honest about where you stand, I explained, showing them how to track every expense. Most people have no idea where their money actually goes. Eleanor looked ashamed when confronted with their clothing and entertainment spending. I had no idea it was this much, she whispered. That's by design, I said. Credit cards and one-click shopping are deliberately frictionless. They don't want you to feel the full impact of each purchase. By evening's end, they had a plan. Sell one of their 2 cars, transfer high-interest credit card debt to a lower-rate consolidation loan, cut back on non-essential expenses, and meet with the private school about financial aid options rather than withdrawing the children mid-year. As they prepared to leave, Eleanor hugged me tightly. Thank you for not judging us. That would be rather hypocritical, considering how often you've all judged me, I replied, but with a smile that softened the words. Todd, who had been quieter throughout the evening, finally spoke up. You know what amazes me the most, Imogene? You've had the means to live like Rebecca and Marcus for years, but you chose not to. I think I'm only now beginning to understand why. His observation stayed with me long after they left. Why had I maintained my modest lifestyle even after financial necessity no longer dictated it? The answer wasn't simple. Part of it was habit. The financial discipline that had built my wealth had become ingrained. Part was pragmatism. I genuinely saw no value in a larger home I'd mostly experience alone, or a luxury car that would accomplish the same transportation function as my reliable Honda. But there was something deeper. Something I hadn't fully articulated even to myself until Todd's comment forced me to reflect. My choices weren't just about money, they were about independence. Every unnecessary expense rejected, every investment made, had purchased not just future financial security, but freedom from others' expectations and judgments. My modest lifestyle was a quiet rebellion against the tyranny of appearances that had ensnared so many in my family. My newfound role as family financial confidant extended to my nephew James, Rebecca and Marcus's oldest, now in his junior year of college. He called one evening in early March, his voice tight with anxiety. Aunt Imogene, do you have a minute to talk? Something in his tone immediately concerned me. Of course. What's wrong? I'm in trouble, he admitted. Financial trouble. Dad would kill me if he knew, and Mom. Well, you know how Mom is about money problems. Indeed I did. Rebecca treated financial difficulties as moral failings, ironic, given her own precarious situation. James explained that he had accumulated significant credit card debt during his sophomore year, trying to keep up with wealthier friends. A weekend ski trip here, an expensive dinner there, designer clothes to fit in with his fraternity brothers. He had been making minimum payments, but the interest was compounding, and he now owed nearly $15,000 across 3 cards. I've been working part-time at the campus bookstore, but it barely makes a dent, he said, his voice cracking. And now I'm getting calls from collection agencies about a store card I forgot about. I don't know what to do. First, take a deep breath, I said calmly. This is fixable. Are you going to tell my parents? I considered this. Not if you don't want me to, but I will need your complete honesty about how this happened and your commitment to changing the patterns that led here. Over the next 2 hours, James opened up not just about his financial mistakes, but the pressure he felt to project a certain image at school. Marcus and Rebecca had always emphasized appearances, inadvertently teaching their children that seeming successful was more important than being financially responsible. Dad drives a BMW but argues with Mom about grocery bills, James said. Nothing makes sense. They talk about wanting me to be independent, but they've never actually taught me how money works. I worked with James to develop a realistic plan. I would pay off his high-interest cards immediately to stop the bleeding, but it would be a loan, not a gift. He would transfer to cheaper campus housing next semester, work additional hours during the summer, and make monthly payments to me at 3% interest, lower than any bank would offer, but enough to teach responsibility. Most importantly, James would attend financial literacy workshops I'd arrange and check in with me monthly about his budget and spending. This wasn't about punishment but education, giving him tools his parents had failed to provide. "Why are you helping me like this?" he asked toward the end of our call. "You could have just lectured me or told me to figure it out myself." "Because financial mistakes at 20 don't need to determine your future at 30, I said, "and because someone should break the cycle in this family." After hanging up, I reflected on how money had shaped and distorted relationships throughout my extended family. My parents had equated financial sacrifice with love, working themselves to exhaustion to give their children opportunities while never teaching us how to manage money emotionally or practically. Marcus had adopted a keeping up with the Joneses mentality that prioritized status symbols over security. Rebecca came from wealth, but feared losing status, driving her to maintain appearances at all costs. Eleanor and Todd tried to provide everything for their children without considering the long-term consequences of their spending. And me? I had reacted by going to the opposite extreme, embracing frugality not just as a financial strategy, but as a shield. A way to protect myself from the vulnerability that comes with wanting things, with caring what others think. My simple lifestyle wasn't just practical, it was armor. The irony wasn't lost on me. I had built substantial wealth while living as if I had little, while my family members projected wealth while teetering on financial cliffs. We were all, in our different ways, controlled by money, whether by its absence or its presence. Spring arrived, bringing with it unexpected developments at Horizon. Our primary competitor, Apex Marketing, was struggling after losing several major clients. Their stock had plummeted, making them a potential acquisition target. After thorough analysis with our executive team, I determined that absorbing Apex would give us access to markets we had been trying to penetrate for years, particularly in the healthcare and financial sectors. The acquisition process was intense: 16-hour days, weekend strategy sessions, confidential negotiations that required absolute discretion. Through it all, I maintained my normal routine at family gatherings, saying nothing about the potential deal that consumed my working hours. At my parents' anniversary dinner in April, Rebecca cornered me by the buffet table. Since the revelation about my position at Horizon, she had been uncharacteristically subdued around me, but tonight she seemed eager to talk. "There are rumors about Horizon acquiring Apex," she said, attempting nonchalance while loading her plate with salmon canapes. "The client relations department is buzzing about it." I selected a deviled egg, keeping my expression neutral. Companies like ours are always subject to speculation. This seems more than speculation. Melissa from legal has been working late every night, and the executive floor has had unusual visitors. Rebecca leaned closer, lowering her voice. "You can tell me. We're family after all." The irony of Rebecca suddenly valuing our family connection wasn't lost on me. For years, she had treated me as little more than an unavoidable presence at gatherings, someone to be tolerated rather than engaged with. Now that she perceived me as having valuable information, I had apparently become worth cultivating. If there were something to tell Rebecca, it would be announced to all employees at the appropriate time, I said evenly. Not whispered about at family functions. She straightened, clearly disappointed but trying not to show it. Of course. I just thought, well, insider knowledge can be valuable in making career decisions. Ah, there it was. Rebecca wasn't concerned about the company's direction or her job security. She was looking for information she could leverage for personal advantage. The most valuable career asset is doing your current job exceptionally well, I replied. Focus on that, and opportunities will follow naturally. She forced a tight smile and moved away, gravitating toward my brother, who was holding court near the bar. I watched as she whispered something in his ear, his eyes darting toward me briefly before he shook his head in what appeared to be mild admonishment. The acquisition of Apex was finalized in late May after a grueling due diligence process. The announcement went out to all employees simultaneously, no special preview for family members, regardless of how much they angled for inside information. The integration would take months, with inevitable restructuring and redundancies to address. As anticipated, Rebecca sought me out immediately after the announcement, this time dropping by my office unannounced, something she had never done before. "Imogene, do you have a minute?" she asked, hovering in my doorway with an expression of calculated concern. I gestured to the chair across from my desk. "Briefly, I have a conference call in 10 minutes. Rebecca settled into the chair, smoothing her skirt with manicured hands. "I wanted to talk to you about the restructuring plan. There are rumors that client relations will be consolidated with significant personnel changes. We're evaluating all departments for operational efficiency," I confirmed. "Those decisions will be made based on performance metrics and business needs." "I've consistently exceeded my targets," she said quickly, "and I've built strong relationships with the Westfield account and the Thompson portfolio." I studied her for a moment. Rebecca had always carried herself with absolute confidence, operating as if the world existed to accommodate her ambitions. Now, for perhaps the first time in her adult life, she was experiencing genuine professional uncertainty. The merger had destabilized her carefully constructed sense of security. "All employees will be evaluated fairly," I assured her. "Your performance record will speak for itself." She hesitated, clearly wanting more reassurance than I was offering. "I was hoping, well, given our family connection, that you might have insights about which positions will be prioritized in the new structure." There it was again, the assumption that family ties should translate to professional advantages. Rebecca had spent years dismissing my career while simultaneously expecting preferential treatment from it. "That would be inappropriate, Rebecca. I don't make personnel decisions based on family relationships, positively or negatively." "Of course not," she backpedaled quickly. "I would never suggest. I'm simply trying to be proactive about my professional development." The best way to do that is to focus on your current responsibilities while demonstrating adaptability during this transition period. Change creates opportunity for those willing to embrace it. Rebecca nodded, her expression a mixture of frustration and forced agreement. As she stood to leave, she paused. "Marcus and I are hosting a barbecue this Sunday. Just family. We'd love for you to come." The invitation surprised me. Rebecca and Marcus typically organized elaborate gatherings with carefully curated guest lists designed to showcase their social connections. A simple family barbecue was decidedly off-brand for them. "Thank you," I said. "What time?" "Around 1. Nothing fancy, just burgers and drinks by the pool." I arrived at their suburban colonial precisely at 1 o'clock on Sunday, carrying a homemade key lime pie, my mother's recipe, which had always been popular at family gatherings. The house looked different somehow. The manicured front lawn remained immaculate, but the ostentatious seasonal decorations Rebecca typically displayed were noticeably absent. Marcus greeted me at the door, beer in hand. "Imogene, come in. Everyone's out back." I followed him through the house, noticing subtle changes. The formal living room, once packed with uncomfortable but impressive furniture, had been simplified. Several of the more grandiose art pieces were missing, replaced by family photographs I hadn't seen displayed before. In the backyard, Eleanor and Todd were helping Rebecca arrange a buffet table, while their children splashed in the pool with James and his younger sister Emma. My parents sat under a large umbrella, looking relaxed in casual attire, a marked departure from the semi-formal dress code Rebecca usually imposed for even the most casual gatherings. "You brought Mom's key lime pie," Eleanor exclaimed, taking the dessert from me. I tried making it last month and it was a disaster. The secret is patience with the lime zest, I said. It makes all the difference. Rebecca approached, wearing simple linen pants and a blouse rather than her usual designer outfits. Thank you for coming, Imogene. Can I get you something to drink? We have lemonade, iced tea, beer. Lemonade would be perfect, thank you. As Rebecca went to fetch my drink, I noticed other changes around their property. The elaborate outdoor kitchen Marcus had installed 2 years ago, a seldom-used showpiece that had cost an astronomical sum, was being utilized in the most basic way, with Marcus flipping burgers on the grill rather than showcasing the complex smoker attachment or rotisserie feature he had once boasted about. My father sidled up beside me. Quite a different atmosphere here today, isn't it? I nodded. I was just noticing that. Your brother and Rebecca have been making some changes, he said, his tone conveying both surprise and approval. Sold one of their cars last month. Marcus mentioned they're considering downsizing once Emma graduates next year. This was unexpected. Marcus and Rebecca had always treated their home as the physical manifestation of their success, the visible proof that they had made it. The idea that they would voluntarily downsize suggested a significant shift in priorities. Rebecca returned with my lemonade, served in a simple glass pitcher rather than the elaborate crystal she typically insisted on using even for casual beverages. Marcus is almost done with the first batch of burgers. We thought we'd eat informally, just grab a plate when you're ready. Everything looks lovely, I said sincerely. She hesitated, then added, We've been making some changes around here, simplifying things. After learning about your approach to life, it made us reconsider some of our choices. I wasn't sure how to respond to this unexpected acknowledgement. Before I could formulate a reply, James called out from the pool. And Imogene, you have to settle a debate. Emma thinks investing in cryptocurrency is a smart long-term strategy. I told her it's too volatile for anything but small speculative positions. I laughed, genuinely amused by my nephew's newfound interest in investment diversification. That sounds like a nuanced discussion better had when you're not in danger of drowning each other. The afternoon unfolded with surprising warmth and authenticity. The conversation never felt forced or performative. No one bragged about recent purchases or name-dropped connections. Instead, we talked about books we'd enjoyed, shared family stories from our childhood, and even had a thoughtful discussion about Eleanor and Todd's plan to transfer their children to public school in the fall. As the gathering wound down, Rebecca asked if I'd help her bring dessert plates out from the kitchen. Once we were alone, she turned to me with uncharacteristic vulnerability. I want you to know that we've been making real changes. Not just superficial ones, she said, arranging dessert forks with careful precision. We met with a financial advisor last month, not to ask for money, but to get our situation under control. I nodded encouragingly, but remained silent. The truth is, we've been living beyond our means for years, she continued. The big house, the luxury cars, the private schools. We thought that's what success looked like. We were trying so hard to impress everyone that we didn't realize we were burying ourselves in debt. It takes courage to make changes, I offered. Marcus and I had a long talk after finding out about your role at Horizon. It made us question everything. Here you were, quietly building something substantial while we were just creating the illusion of success. She met my eyes directly. I've been unfair to you, Imogene. For years, I judged you based on superficial things that actually don't matter at all. We all make mistakes, Rebecca. This was more than a mistake. It was a fundamental flaw in how I see the world. She hesitated, then added softly, I'm trying to teach Emma a different way before it's too late. I don't want her to spend her life chasing appearances like I did. As I drove home that evening, I reflected on the unexpected turns life had taken. For decades, I had moved through the world quietly, building my success away from scrutiny or recognition. I had accepted my family's misconceptions about me as the cost of maintaining my independence. Now, paradoxically, the revelation of my accomplishments seemed to be freeing them from their own self-imposed constraints. The integration of Apex into Horizon progressed through the summer months, consuming much of my professional attention. As anticipated, there were redundancies to address, particularly in overlapping departments. The client relations division, where Rebecca worked, was particularly affected, with nearly 30% of positions identified as duplicative. I had been clear with the integration team from the beginning. All retention decisions would be based strictly on performance metrics, client feedback, and skills assessment. Family connections would play no role whatsoever, positive or negative. I recused myself from direct involvement in decisions regarding Rebecca's department, delegating that authority to our chief client officer and HR director with clear evaluation criteria. In late July, the final restructuring plans were approved by the board. Employees would be notified of their status the following week, with generous severance packages for those whose positions were eliminated and clear transition paths for those being retained in modified roles. The evening before notifications were scheduled to begin, I received an unexpected visit at my apartment. When the buzzer sounded at 7:30 p.m., I assumed it was the delivery person with my Thai food order. Instead, Rebecca's voice came through the intercom. "Imogene? It's Rebecca. I'm sorry to drop by unannounced. Could I speak with you for a moment?" Puzzled, I buzzed her up. Rebecca had never visited my apartment before, had actively avoided it, in fact, making excuses whenever I'd hosted family gatherings in the past. When I opened the door, she looked uncharacteristically disheveled. Her usually perfect hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and she wore jeans and a plain sweater rather than her typical curated ensemble. "I'm sorry to intrude," she said, immediately. "I know tomorrow is the day we find out about our positions, and I couldn't sleep." I gestured for her to come in, noticing how her eyes widened slightly as she took in my living space for the first time. My apartment was modest in size but thoughtfully arranged. Quality furniture chosen for comfort and longevity, walls lined with bookshelves, simple but original artwork collected during my travels. "Would you like some tea?" I offered. She nodded gratefully, following me to the small but efficient kitchen. "Your home is lovely," she said, sounding genuinely surprised. "It's so peaceful." "Thank you. I've been happy here." I filled the kettle and set it on the stove. "Rebecca, I should tell you that I can't discuss the restructuring decisions before the official notifications." "I know," she said quickly. "That's not why I'm here. Actually, I came to tell you something before the announcements are made." I raised an eyebrow, waiting. "I've submitted my resignation, effective next month." This was unexpected. "May I ask why?" Rebecca twisted her hands together, a nervous gesture I'd never observed in her before. "When the merger was announced, I realized my position would likely be vulnerable. I've been with Horizon for 3 years, while many Apex client managers have been with their accounts for much longer. That's true, but longevity isn't the only factor being considered." "I know, but instead of panicking, I started thinking about what I really want from my career." She accepted the mug of tea I offered. "The truth is, I've never been passionate about corporate client relations. I was good at it because I'm socially adept and detail-oriented, but it never fulfilled." "So, what would fulfill you?" I asked, genuinely curious. "Teaching," she said, a small smile appearing. "I've enrolled in a certification program to teach business communications at the community college level. It starts in September." I was momentarily speechless. Of all the directions I might have imagined Rebecca's career taking, academia had never crossed my mind. "That's quite a change," I managed finally. "My father was a professor," she said softly. before he lost everything in bad investments and drinking. I was embarrassed by him for so long, by his shabby tweed jackets and his ancient car and his modest house filled with books instead of status symbols. Her eyes grew distant. But he loved teaching. It was the one thing he talked about with real joy, even after everything else fell apart. This was a side of Rebecca I had never glimpsed, a vulnerability and personal history she had kept carefully hidden beneath her polished exterior. "I think you'll make an excellent teacher," I said sincerely. "Really? You're not just saying that?" "No. You're articulate, organized, and, when you choose to be, very good at explaining complex concepts clearly." She smiled, perhaps the first genuine smile she had ever directed at me. "Thank you, Imogene. That means a lot, especially coming from you." We talked for nearly 2 hours, covering ground we had never explored in all our years as family. Rebecca spoke about her childhood, the early years of comfort followed by financial collapse, her determination to never experience that insecurity again, the defensive materialism she had developed as a shield against judgment. I shared stories about my early career, the mentors who had shaped my approach to business, the gradual accumulation of knowledge that had positioned me to recognize opportunities others missed. As she prepared to leave, Rebecca paused in the doorway. "You know what I realized lately? All these years, I thought you were depriving yourself by living simply, but you were actually giving yourself something invaluable. Freedom from what other people think." I considered this. I wouldn't claim to be completely immune to others' opinions. I just decided long ago that my financial choices would be guided by my values, not external expectations. Well, it worked. You built something real while the rest of us were constructing elaborate facades. She shook her head ruefully. The irony is, I spent years pitying you for what I perceived as your limitations, never realizing you were the one with true autonomy all along. After she left, I stood at my window watching as she walked to her car. Not the luxury SUV she had driven for years, but a modest sedan similar to my own Honda. The symbolism wasn't lost on me. Rebecca was perhaps the last person I would have expected to embrace voluntary simplicity. Yet here she was, reconstructing her life according to new values. The autumn brought unexpected changes to Horizon Dynamics. With the Apex acquisition, fully integrated, our marketing capabilities had expanded into sectors previously beyond our reach. The healthcare division, in particular, was flourishing under new leadership from the merged talent pool. By October, our quarterly results exceeded even the most optimistic projections, attracting attention from larger corporations interested in strategic partnerships. During this period of corporate growth, I found myself reflecting more deeply on my personal legacy. At 53, I was far from retirement age, but the events of the past year had shifted my perspective. For decades, I had channeled my energy into building financial security and professional success. Now that those goals had been abundantly achieved, what was I working toward? The question took on new urgency when my mother was diagnosed with early-stage Parkinson's disease. Though her prognosis was good with proper treatment, the diagnosis served as a stark reminder of life's impermanence. My father, approaching his 80th birthday, had been her primary caregiver through other health challenges. Now they both needed support. I invited them to dinner at my apartment one evening in late October, over my mother's favorite lemon chicken, a recipe she had taught me decades ago. I proposed an idea I had been contemplating for weeks. "I've been looking at properties," I said, refilling their water glasses. "Duplexes, specifically. I thought we might consider living next door to each other." My mother set down her fork, surprise evident in her expression. "You want to live next door to us? But you've always valued your independence." "I still do," I assured her. "But proximity doesn't have to mean losing independence. A duplex would give us all privacy while making it easier for me to help when needed." My father, more practical as always, asked, "Where are you looking?" "Ridgewood Heights. It's 15 minutes from my office, with good medical facilities nearby and excellent walking paths." I had done thorough research, considering their needs alongside my own preferences. "There's a property available with 2 connected 3-bedroom units, each with its own private entrance and garden space." My mother's eyes welled with tears. "You would do that for us?" "Not just for you," I said honestly. "For me too. I've realized lately that I've been so focused on financial security that I've neglected other kinds of wealth, like time with the people who matter most." My father, never demonstrative with his emotions, cleared his throat gruffly. "We wouldn't want to be a burden, Imogene." "You raised 3 children while working multiple jobs," I reminded him. "You supported us through college, helped with down payments on first homes, and never asked for anything in return. This isn't about obligation, it's about choice. I want to do this." 2 weeks later, we toured the property together. The duplex was more spacious than my apartment, with large windows that flooded the rooms with natural light. My mother immediately envisioned where her cherished houseplants would thrive, while my father assessed the accessibility features with an engineer's precision. By the end of November, the purchase was complete, and we began the process of selling their suburban home and my apartment. The news of our upcoming move elicited varied reactions from my siblings. Eleanor expressed genuine enthusiasm, offering to help with packing and organizing the transition. Marcus seemed perplexed, unable to comprehend why someone with my resources would choose a duplex over a more impressive property. Rebecca, surprisingly, was the most supportive. "It makes perfect sense," she said when we discussed it over coffee, one afternoon. "Your parents get to maintain their independence while having support nearby. You get peace of mind knowing you can respond quickly if they need help. It's an elegant solution." I studied her curiously. "That's exactly my thinking. I'm surprised you see it that way." Rebecca smiled ruefully. "The old Rebecca would have questioned why someone with your means would choose a modest duplex rather than a showcase property. But I'm trying to see beyond appearances these days." Her self-awareness impressed me. People rarely change fundamental aspects of their worldview, especially in middle age. Yet Rebecca seemed to be undergoing a genuine transformation, reassessing values she had held for decades. As we prepared for the move, I found myself sorting through possessions accumulated over a lifetime. Unlike many in my family, I had never been particularly acquisitive, but even my relatively modest lifestyle had resulted in collections of items that no longer served a purpose. Books I would never reread, clothing I hadn't worn in years, kitchen, gadgets that had seemed essential but proved redundant. I adopted a methodical approach to the process, evaluating each item with 3 simple questions. Do I need this? Do I use this regularly? Does this bring me joy? If the answer to all 3 was no, the item was donated or discarded. What remained was a curated collection of possessions that genuinely enhanced my life, rather than cluttering it. My mother found this process more challenging. A child of parents who had lived through the Great Depression, she had been raised to save everything, to find potential value in even the most worn items. Each piece of Tupperware with a missing lid, each frayed tablecloth, each outdated appliance represented security against future scarcity. "Mom," I said gently one afternoon, finding her agonizing over a box of chipped mugs, "you don't need to keep things out of fear anymore. If something breaks or wears out, we can replace it." She looked up at me, vulnerability in her eyes. "It's hard to let go of habits that kept us afloat for so long." "I know," I acknowledged. "But think of it this way. By keeping only what you truly need and love, you're making space for new experiences, new memories." Gradually, she embraced the process, finding unexpected liberation in releasing possessions that had silently burdened her for years. By mid-December, both our homes had been pared down to essentials and treasures, ready for the January move. The holiday season arrived with its usual flurry of social obligations. Marcus and Rebecca traditionally hosted an elaborate Christmas Eve dinner, but this year they announced a change of plans. Instead of their usual catered affair with color-coordinated decorations and formal attire, they invited the family for a potluck gathering where each person would bring a meaningful dish. "Bring something that represents a special memory or tradition," Rebecca explained in her group message. "We thought it would be nice to share stories along with food this year." Eleanor responded immediately, offering to bring our grandmother's Swedish meatballs, a recipe that had defined childhood holiday gatherings. My parents committed to their famous apple strudel, a day-long baking project they had perfected over decades of marriage. I chose my father's favorite potato soup, a simple but hearty dish that had sustained our family through many cold Michigan winters. When I arrived at Marcus and Rebecca's home on Christmas Eve, the transformation was immediately apparent. Gone were the professional decorations and perfectly coordinated table settings. Instead, the house was adorned with handmade ornaments, family photographs, and mismatched candles that created a warm, inviting atmosphere. Rebecca greeted me at the door, accepting my pot of soup with genuine appreciation. "This smells amazing. Is this your dad's recipe?" "With a few small adaptations," I admitted. I added leeks and a bit of fresh thyme. Inside, the formal dining room had been abandoned in favor of the more casual family room. The large table had been moved in and extended with card tables to accommodate everyone. Chairs of various styles had been gathered, creating an eclectic but charming setting. James and Emma were helping their grandparents set up the dessert table, while Eleanor's children arranged name cards decorated with hand-drawn pictures. The atmosphere was relaxed, joyful, and notably free of the tension that had characterized family gatherings in the past. As we settled around the table, Rebecca suggested a new tradition. "Before we eat, I thought it might be nice if each person shared the story behind the dish they brought." One by one, family members recounted memories associated with their contributions. Eleanor describing how our grandmother would let her help roll the meatballs as a child. My mother explaining how she and my father had learned to make strudel during their honeymoon in Vienna. When my turn came, I spoke about winter evenings when my father would make potato soup after long days at the factory, how the simple act of sharing a warm meal had created moments of connection amid difficult circumstances. The meal that followed was unlike any previous family gathering I could remember. Instead of superficial exchanges and subtle competitions, the conversation flowed naturally between generations, punctuated by genuine laughter and thoughtful reflections. My nephew James engaged my father in a lengthy discussion about engineering principles. Eleanor's husband Todd and Marcus discovered a shared interest in vintage record collecting. My mother and Rebecca's daughter Emma bonded over their mutual love of gardening. As the evening drew to a close, Marcus tapped his glass for attention. "Before everyone heads home, Rebecca and I have an announcement." The room quieted as my brother stood, uncharacteristically emotional. This past year has been transformative for us. We've been reevaluating what really matters, and we've made some decisions we wanted to share with you all. Rebecca joined him, their hands clasped together in rare public affection. "We've decided to sell the house after Emma graduates in June. We've found a smaller place closer to the community college where I'll be teaching." Murmurs of surprise rippled through the room. This colonial house had been their showcase property, the physical embodiment of their perceived success. Voluntarily downsizing represented a seismic shift in their values. "The new place needs some work," Marcus continued, "but it has character and potential. Most importantly, it will free us from the financial pressure we've been under for too long. We want to focus on experiences rather than things from now on." The sincerity in his voice moved me. For decades, Marcus had defined himself through material possessions and status symbols. Choosing a different path required not just practical adjustments, but a fundamental recalibration of identity. As guests began gathering coats and leftovers, Rebecca approached me quietly. "I wanted to thank you, Imogene." "For what?" I asked, genuinely puzzled. "For showing us another way to live," she said simply. "Without judgment or lecture, you demonstrated that a meaningful life isn't measured by square footage or brand names." "You made these changes yourselves," I pointed out. "I didn't suggest any of it." "Sometimes the most powerful influence is simply seeing someone live authentically," she replied. "For years I pitied you for what I perceived as limitations. Now I realize you were making deliberate choices aligned with your values, while I was trapped in an exhausting performance." Her insight surprised me, not because it was inaccurate, but because it revealed a depth of self-reflection I hadn't expected from Rebecca. "People are more complex than our judgments of them," I reminded myself. "More capable of growth and change than we often give them credit for." The new year brought fresh challenges at Horizon. A potential investor had expressed interest in acquiring a significant stake in the company, promising capital for expansion into international markets. The offer was compelling from a business perspective, but would inevitably shift the power dynamics within the organization I had carefully built. After thorough analysis with my executive team and trusted advisors, I concluded that while global expansion aligned with our long-term vision, this particular partnership arrangement would compromise the company culture and values that had been central to our success. I declined the offer, choosing instead to pursue international growth through a more measured, self-funded approach that would preserve our independence. The decision was met with mixed reactions from the board. Some members expressed concern about missed opportunities, while others respected the commitment to maintaining our carefully cultivated corporate identity. What surprised me was how confidently I held my position, unmoved by pressure to prioritize rapid growth over sustainable values. In my younger years, I might have been more easily swayed by impressive projections and promises of accelerated success. Now, with decades of experience behind me, I recognized the value of patient, intentional growth, in business as in personal finance. The fastest path is rarely the most sustainable. January brought the move to the duplex, a process made more challenging by an unexpected snowstorm that blanketed Millfield in 8 inches of powder. Despite the weather, Eleanor and her family arrived early on moving day, bringing thermoses of hot chocolate and a determined spirit that transformed a potentially stressful experience into something approaching fun. My parents settled into their side of the duplex with remarkable ease. My father immediately began customizing storage solutions for my mother's craft supplies, while she arranged her beloved houseplants in optimal locations throughout their new space. I arranged my books, art, and furnishings in my own unit, appreciating the additional room while maintaining the simplicity that had defined my lifestyle for decades. The duplex quickly became a natural gathering place for family. Eleanor's children would stop by after school to bake cookies with their grandmother. James began a Sunday tradition of bringing breakfast and the newspaper for his grandfather. Even Marcus and Rebecca became regular visitors, often joining us for simple weeknight dinners or afternoon coffee. One evening in February, as a gentle snow fell outside, I sat in my living room reviewing quarterly projections when a knock sounded at my door. It was my father, looking uncharacteristically hesitant. "Do you have a minute?" he asked, hovering in the doorway. "Of course." I set aside my laptop. "Everything all right?" He settled into an armchair, silent for a long moment before speaking. "Your mother and I have been talking. About money, specifically." I waited, sensing he needed space to find the right words. "We've always been private about financial matters," he continued, "even with our children, maybe especially with our children. But recent events have made us reconsider that approach." "In what way?" I asked. "When Marcus and Rebecca started making changes, selling their big house, cutting back on luxury purchases, It made us reflect on what we taught you all about money. He sighed heavily. Or rather, what we didn't teach you. You taught us the value of hard work, I reminded him, the importance of saving for the future. But we never talked openly about financial decisions. We never explained our reasoning or involved you in discussions about money management. He shook his head regretfully. We thought we were protecting you from worries, but instead, we left you without practical knowledge. There was truth in his assessment. Our household had operated with a clear financial division. My parents earned and managed the money, while the children were expected to focus on school and eventually careers. Questions about household finances were discouraged as inappropriate or unnecessary. Marcus learned to equate spending with success, my father continued. Eleanor never developed basic financial literacy. Even you, with all your achievement, you had to figure everything out on your own, didn't you? I nodded, remembering the overwhelming confusion of my early 20s, trying to understand retirement accounts, insurance options, investment vehicles without guidance or context. We're trying to do better with the grandchildren, he said. Your mother has started having honest conversations with Eleanor's kids about our financial journey, the mistakes as well as the successes. That's wonderful, I said sincerely. Financial education is a gift that lasts a lifetime. Which brings me to the real reason I wanted to talk tonight. He straightened, his expression turning more businesslike. Your mother and I have some investments and savings, not a fortune by any means, but enough to be meaningful. We'd like your help reviewing our portfolio and estate planning. The request touched me deeply. My father had always been fiercely independent about financial matters, viewing any suggestion of assistance as an implication of incompetence. I'd be honored, I said simply. Over the following weeks, I worked with my parents to organize their financial records, optimize their investments, and ensure their estate planning aligned with their wishes. The process created a new dimension to our relationship, a partnership of equals rather than the parent-child dynamic that had persisted even into my professional success. Spring arrived, bringing with it Rebecca's first teaching position at Millfield Community College. Though it was only a part-time adjunct role teaching business communications 2 evenings a week, she approached it with an enthusiasm I had never observed in her corporate career. The students are incredible, she told me over coffee one Saturday morning. So diverse in age and background. I have 18-year-olds just starting out, middle-aged people changing careers, even a retired military officer who wants to improve his writing skills. Do you miss the corporate environment at all? I asked, curious about her adjustment. Honestly? Not really. She stirred her coffee thoughtfully. There's something fulfilling about helping people develop skills that will serve them throughout their careers. It feels meaningful in a way that managing client accounts never did. Rebecca had also begun volunteering with a local financial literacy program, teaching basic money management skills to high school students and young adults. The irony wasn't lost on either of us, that she was now educating others on principles she herself had only recently embraced. I keep thinking about how differently things might have turned out if someone had taught me these concepts when I was 18, she reflected. If I had understood compound interest and debt cycles and lifestyle inflation from the beginning. It's never too late to learn, I reminded her, or to teach others. The transformation in Rebecca continued to unfold in surprising ways. When Emma was accepted to 3 universities, including an Ivy League school that had been the family's dream, Rebecca and Marcus made a decision that would have been unthinkable a year earlier. We're encouraging her to consider State University, Rebecca explained during a family dinner. The scholarship package is much better, and she wouldn't graduate with crushing debt. Marcus nodded in agreement. 4 years ago, we would have pushed her toward the most prestigious name regardless of cost. We would have figured out the loans. Later, or expected Imogene to step in as the wealthy aunt. He shot me an apologetic look. but now we see how short-sighted that approach was. Emma, mature beyond her 18 years, had reached the same conclusion independently. "I want to major in environmental science," she explained. "State has one of the best programs in the country, and I'd rather save the extra money for graduate school later." As spring progressed towards summer, the changes in our extended family continued to solidify into new patterns and traditions. Sunday dinners at the duplex became a weekly constant, with various family members taking turns preparing meals. My mother started a small vegetable garden in the shared backyard, enlisting Eleanor's children as apprentice gardeners. My father and James embarked on a project to restore a vintage ham radio set they had discovered at an estate sale. Marcus and Rebecca sold their Colonial in May, receiving less than they had hoped in the current market, but expressing relief at closing that chapter of their lives. Their new home was a mid-century modern ranch house needing cosmetic updates, but structurally sound. Rather than hiring expensive contractors, they embraced a DIY approach, involving Emma and James in painting, landscaping, and simple renovations. "It's been surprisingly satisfying," Marcus admitted one evening as we sat on my patio after dinner. "Working with my hands, seeing tangible progress each day. I feel like I'm finally building something real instead of just an image." I understood exactly what he meant. There's a particular satisfaction in creating rather than consuming, in improving rather than simply acquiring. It's a distinction that had guided my own choices for decades, though I had never explicitly articulated it. By early summer, Rebecca had been offered a full-time teaching position for the fall semester, an unusual opportunity for someone so new to academia, but a testament to her natural aptitude and dedication. Marcus, meanwhile, had begun exploring options for redirecting his own career. "I've been in sales for 25 years, he told me during a Saturday morning walk around Ridgewood Lake. "I'm good at it, but I've never loved it. It was always about the commission checks, the status, the recognition." "What would you love?" I asked. He considered this thoughtfully. "I've always enjoyed working with young people. When James was in Little League, coaching his team was the highlight of my week." This revelation surprised me. Marcus had never spoken about coaching with particular enthusiasm at the time, at least not to me. Perhaps I had been so accustomed to seeing him through the lens of materialism and status-seeking that I had missed other dimensions of his character. "Have you thought about pursuing that more formally?" I suggested. "Schools are always looking for good coaches, especially those who can also teach academic subjects." "Actually, I've been looking into youth development programs," he said. "The community center is starting a mentorship initiative for teens from low-income families, teaching life skills, career planning, that sort of thing. They need program coordinators with business experience. The position would mean a significant pay cut from his corporate sales role. But with their reduced expenses in the new house and Rebecca's teaching position, they had determined it was financially viable. More importantly, it aligned with values that Marcus was only now, in his 50s, allowing himself to prioritize. As summer progressed, I found myself reflecting on the unexpected journey of the past year. What had begun as a moment of revelation, the look on Rebecca's face when she realized I owned the company where she worked, had catalyzed profound changes throughout our extended family. Not because I had actively sought to influence them, but because the disconnect between perception and reality had forced a collective reassessment of assumptions and priorities. For decades, I had been judged for choices that were deliberate and aligned with my values, living simply, investing consistently, prioritizing financial independence over visible prosperity. Now those same choices were being recognized not as limitations or deprivations, but as intentional strategies for building a life of meaning and security. One evening in late June, as fireflies blinked in the gathering dusk, our family gathered on the shared patio between the duplex units. The occasion was modest. My mother's successful harvest of the first vegetables from her garden, transformed into a simple but delicious ratatouille. We sat around the large outdoor table, passing dishes and sharing stories, the conversation flowing without the undercurrents of judgment and competition that had characterized family gatherings in the past. Looking around at the faces illuminated by candles and string lights, my parents contentedly aging in place, Marcus and Rebecca embracing new priorities and possibilities, Eleanor and Todd steadily rebuilding their financial foundation, the cousins growing into thoughtful young adults with healthier relationships to money and success than their parents had modeled, I felt a profound sense of gratitude. Not for being proven right, not for any vindication of my choices, but for the simple fact that it's never too late to choose a different path. That families, like individuals, can evolve and grow. That beneath the surface judgments and misconceptions, connections remain that can be strengthened and renewed when authenticity replaces pretense. The most valuable assets, I reflected as laughter echoed in the warm evening air, are never the ones that can be quantified on a balance sheet. They're the moments of genuine connection, the courage to change course when necessary, the freedom to define success according to personal values rather than external expectations. By that measure, my family had never been wealthier. The first anniversary of what our family had come to call the revelation approached with the turning of autumn leaves. A year since Rebecca had sat frozen in that conference room, staring at her laptop as the company-wide announcement confirmed what seemed impossible, that her seemingly modest sister-in-law was not just an executive, but the controlling owner of Horizon Dynamics. That single moment had rippled through our lives, transforming relationships and challenging long-held assumptions about success, worth, and appearance. Now, as September painted Millfield in russet and gold, I found myself contemplating next steps in both my professional and personal journeys. Horizon was thriving, our post-merger integration more successful than even the most optimistic projections had anticipated. Our client base had expanded by 30%, and employee satisfaction scores reflected the careful attention we'd paid to preserving culture through the transition. From an external perspective, I had achieved everything I'd set out to accomplish: financial security, professional recognition, a thriving enterprise built on quality and integrity. Yet success creates its own questions. Where do you go when you've reached the summit? What mountains remain to climb? At 54, I wasn't ready for retirement, but I found myself increasingly drawn to pursuits beyond the day-to-day operations of the company. One Tuesday morning, I called an unexpected meeting with my executive team. We gathered in the glass-walled conference room overlooking Millfield Central Park, autumn sunshine streaming through the windows as leaves drifted past. "I've been considering the next phase of leadership for Horizon," I began, watching their expressions shift from curiosity to concern. "Not because I'm planning to leave, but because sustainable organizations require thoughtful succession planning." Relief visibly rippled through the room. Denise, our chief technology officer, nodded emphatically. "The best time to plan for leadership transition is when it's not immediately necessary." "Exactly," I agreed. "Which is why I'd like to implement a more distributed leadership model over the next year. We've grown to a size where no single person should be essential to our operations or decision-making." We spent the morning mapping out a restructuring plan that would spread strategic authority across a broader leadership team while maintaining the centralized vision that had guided our growth. By lunch, we had drafted a framework that would allow me to gradually shift from day-to-day management to a more strategic oversight role. "This feels like the right evolution," said Michael, our chief financial officer who had been with me almost since the beginning. "We've built a strong foundation. Now we need to ensure it outlasts any individual leader, even you, Imogene." The comment might have stung earlier in my career, when I was still proving myself in an industry that often underestimated women. Now it felt like validation of everything I had worked to build, an organization with values and systems strong enough to transcend my personal leadership. That evening, walking home through the park rather than driving, I found myself reflecting on the concept of legacy. What did I want to leave behind? How would the wealth I had accumulated benefit others after I was gone? These questions seemed particularly relevant as I observed my parents' journey through their 70s, witnessing their increasing focus on what they would pass to future generations, not just materially, but in values and wisdom. My path took me past the community college where Rebecca now taught full-time. The evening classes were in session, lights glowing from the classrooms as students of all ages pursued education that might transform their prospects. On impulse, I turned into the campus, finding my way to the business department on the second floor of the East Building. Through a classroom door window, I caught a glimpse of Rebecca in her element. She stood at a whiteboard, gesturing animatedly, as she explained some concept to a diverse group of students who appeared genuinely engaged. Gone was the carefully cultivated image she had maintained for decades: the designer clothes, the strategic accessories, the perfectly coiffed hair. Instead, she wore simple dark pants and a burgundy sweater, her hair pulled back in a practical style that framed her face naturally. What struck me most was her expression, alive with authentic enthusiasm, unmarred by the calculation and performance that had characterized her interactions in corporate settings. She looked happy, purposeful, at ease in her own skin in a way I had never observed during our 20 years as family. I slipped away without interrupting, but the image stayed with me as I continued my walk home. Rebecca had discovered meaningful work that aligned with her values and utilized her genuine strengths. She had found her vocation rather than just a prestigious position, something many people, regardless of financial success, never achieve. The next morning brought an unexpected email from James, my nephew, who had once struggled with credit card debt while trying to maintain appearances at college. After our intervention the previous year, he had not only stabilized his finances, but developed a genuine interest in financial literacy and education. "Aunt Imogene," his message began, "I've been thinking about our conversations about financial education and how it might have changed the trajectory of our family if we'd learned these principles earlier. I want to do something about that gap for others." He went on to outline a concept for a financial literacy program targeted at high school and college students, practical workshops teaching basics like budgeting, understanding credit, and beginning investing. He had already secured cooperation from his university to pilot the program, but needed guidance on curriculum development and potentially some seed funding. "I'm not asking for handouts," he emphasized toward the end of the email. "I've applied for 3 small grants to cover initial costs, but your mentorship would be invaluable, both your business expertise and your personal philosophy about money and value." The request touched me deeply. James wasn't asking for money or connections, the usual currencies in our family's economy of favor and obligation. He was seeking knowledge, perspective, and guidance in creating something meaningful. Moreover, he was focusing his energy on addressing a need he had personally experienced, turning his own struggle into potential benefit for others. I responded immediately, suggesting we meet that weekend to discuss his vision in more detail. As I pressed send, I realized James's project might represent an ideal intersection of my accumulated expertise and my growing desire to contribute beyond the boardroom. Teaching others to build financial independence aligned perfectly with values I had practiced for decades. Saturday morning found us at a quiet corner table in Laurel Cafe, a local establishment that had become my preferred weekend retreat. James arrived punctually, dressed in the casual but neat style he had adopted since his financial awakening, clothes chosen for quality and longevity rather than brand recognition. "I've been working on a curriculum outline," he explained, spreading handwritten notes across the table. 4 modules covering fundamental concepts, then more specialized tracks for different interests or needs. I reviewed his materials, impressed by the thoughtfulness he had brought to the project. "You've clearly put significant work into this. What made you decide to focus on financial education specifically?" James considered the question carefully. "2 things, really. First, my own experience, realizing how close I came to establishing Destructive patterns that could have affected my entire life. If you hadn't intervened when you did, he shook his head. But it's bigger than that. I've watched how money assumptions shaped our entire family dynamics for generations. The secrecy, the performance, the judgments based on visible spending, rather than actual security. His insight surprised me. That at 21, he could recognize patterns that had taken me decades to fully understand. The thing is, he continued, financial literacy isn't just about understanding compound interest or debt cycles. It's about examining our relationship with money, the emotional and psychological dimensions that drive our decisions. That's exactly right, I agreed. Technical knowledge is necessary but insufficient. We need to address the beliefs and values underlying financial choices. Our discussion expanded from curriculum details to broader questions about education and impact. By the time we finished our second pot of tea, we had sketched a framework for a comprehensive program that could potentially grow beyond the university, setting to reach community organizations and schools. I'd like to be involved, I told him as we gathered our notes. Not just as an advisor, but as an active participant. I've been looking for meaningful projects beyond my corporate role, and this resonates deeply. James's eyes widened slightly, perhaps surprised by my level of commitment, or perhaps simply processing the potential impact of having the CEO of a successful company personally involved in his fledgling initiative. That would be amazing, he said finally. But are you sure you have time, with everything at Horizon? I'm in the process of redistributing some of my operational responsibilities, I explained, creating space for exactly this kind of project. And I can't think of a better use of that time than helping the next generation build financially stable lives on their own terms. As autumn deepened, the financial literacy program began taking shape. James secured a small grant from the university's Innovation Fund, providing just enough for basic materials and administrative support. I contributed my expertise in curriculum development and agreed to teach the investment module personally. Rebecca, learning of the initiative through family conversations, immediately volunteered to develop and teach a communications component, helping students articulate financial goals and negotiate effectively. Marcus, surprisingly, asked if he might contribute as well, offering to share his experiences from both sides of the consumer finance industry. I spent years selling financial products that weren't always in people's best interests, he admitted during a planning session. In my living room, I understand the tactics used to leverage emotion over logic in financial decisions. That knowledge could help young people recognize and resist manipulation. What had begun as James's personal project was evolving into a family endeavor, the way of transforming our collective experience, both positive and negative, into educational value for others. There was something powerfully redemptive about this collaboration, as if we were collectively metabolizing decades of financial dysfunction into something constructive and healing. The program launched in early November, with a pilot cohort of 30 students from diverse backgrounds. We secured classroom space at the community college, creating an environment accessible to both university students and community members. The first session exceeded our expectations, with engaged participants ranging from 18-year-old freshmen to middle-aged adults returning to education mid-career. After the inaugural workshop, Rebecca and I walked together to the parking lot, the evening air crisp with approaching winter. "Did you ever imagine we'd be doing something like this together?" she asked, her breath visible in the cold. "Never," I admitted with a small laugh. But then, life rarely follows our imagined trajectories. Isn't that the truth? She pulled her scarf tighter against the chill. You know, when I first married Marcus, I saw you as someone to be pitied. Living in that small apartment, driving that practical car, never indulging in luxuries. I nodded, familiar with the assessment, though we had never discussed it so directly. Then, after the revelation at Horizon, I swung to the opposite extreme, seeing you as someone who had everything figured out, who had never struggled with the insecurities and pressures that drove my own choices. She shook her head ruefully. Both perspectives were oversimplified, weren't they? Most human judgments are, I observed. We see fragments of others' lives and construct narratives that fit our existing worldview. What I'm realizing now, Rebecca continued thoughtfully, is that the most valuable thing you accumulated wasn't the money or the company ownership. It was the clarity about what really matters to you, the alignment between your values and your choices. Her insight struck me as remarkably perceptive. For all our years of mutual misunderstanding, Rebecca had finally recognized what had guided my decisions all along. Not deprivation or excessive frugality, but intentional choice based on personal values. That clarity wasn't instant, I reminded her. It developed gradually, through experience and reflection, just as you're developing your own clarity now. She smiled, a genuine expression that transformed her face. Better late than never, I suppose. As Thanksgiving approached, Eleanor suggested a departure from our usual divided holiday traditions. Rather than separate celebrations with different branches of the family, she proposed gathering everyone at the duplex, my parents and me hosting together, with each family bringing dishes to share. It would be more relaxed than trying to maintain 2 households' worth of formal dining, she argued during our Sunday dinner. And the cousins could actually spend time together instead of being rushed from one obligation to another. My mother, who had always maintained rather rigid holiday expectations, surprised me by embracing the idea enthusiastically. We could set up tables in both units and the connecting patio if the weather permits, she suggested. Make it a progressive meal moving between spaces. The plan evolved organically, with family members volunteering for various aspects of preparation and cleanup. Marcus and Rebecca offered to bring tables and chairs from the community college where they both now had connections. Eleanor's teenagers designed a seating arrangement that intentionally mixed different branches of the family rather than defaulting to the usual segregation by household. When Thanksgiving Day arrived, the atmosphere was noticeably different from previous years. My mother had abandoned her usual insistence on formal place settings in favor of sturdy, mismatched plates that could travel easily between spaces. My father had set up a buffet system that allowed people to serve themselves rather than waiting for the ceremonial passing of dishes that often left food cold before it reached the end of the table. What struck me most was the absence of performance and pretense that had characterized family gatherings in the past. No one arrived bearing excessively expensive wines chosen for label recognition rather than compatibility with the meal. No subtle competition emerged through comments about recent purchases or achievements. Instead, conversation flowed naturally, around topics of genuine interest: books recently enjoyed, projects underway, experiences that had proven meaningful. After dinner, as we gathered in my parents' living room for coffee and dessert, my father cleared his throat for attention. Eleanor reminded me recently that we've never properly acknowledged a significant milestone, he began, his expression unusually solemn. A year ago, our family began a transformation that has affected every one of us in profound ways. Glances were exchanged around the room, recognition of the anniversary we had all been aware of but hadn't explicitly addressed. When we discovered that Imogene owned Horizon Dynamics, my father continued, it wasn't just a revelation about her professional success. It was a challenge to assumptions many of us had held about what success actually means, about the relationship between appearance and reality, between consumption and genuine prosperity. I felt a flush of embarrassment at being the center of attention, but remained silent, recognizing the importance of this moment for our collective healing. I want to acknowledge the courage it took for many of us to reconsider deeply held beliefs, my father said, his gaze moving around the room to include everyone. Marcus and Rebecca downsizing and pursuing work aligned with their values rather than just financial return. Eleanor and Todd making difficult financial decisions to secure their family's future. James developing a program to help others avoid the traps he encountered. His voice softened as he continued. And Imogene, living according to her own values all along, regardless of others' judgments or misunderstandings. The room fell silent, the acknowledgement hanging in the air between us. Then Emma, Rebecca's daughter, who had recently begun her freshman year at State University, spoke, up from her position on the floor near the fireplace. "I've been thinking about this a lot lately," she said, her voice carrying the thoughtful quality that reminded me of my mother in her younger years. "In my economics class, we've been discussing how societies measure value, GDP, income metrics, consumption patterns. But those measurements miss so much of what creates actual well-being and security." She looked directly at me, her expression earnest. "Aunt Imogene taught us that true prosperity isn't visible on the surface. It's not the car you drive or the address on your mail. It's the freedom to make choices aligned with your values, the security to weather unexpected challenges, the ability to help others without compromising your own stability." Her insight, articulated with such clarity from someone so young, moved me deeply. The lessons I had hoped might eventually permeate to the next generation were already taking root, already bearing fruit in perspectives that would shape her life choices going forward. As the evening wound down and family members began gathering belongings for departure, Rebecca approached me in the kitchen where I was packing leftover containers. "There's something I've been meaning to tell you," she said, her voice low enough to remain private amid the general commotion of leave-taking. "I received a job offer last week, Director of Community Partnerships at the Chamber of Commerce. It would mean a significant salary increase, more visibility, more status." I paused in my task, giving her my full attention. "That sounds like a remarkable opportunity. What are you thinking?" "A year ago, I would have accepted immediately," she admitted. "It would have seemed like validation, proof of my professional worth. But now—" She shook her head slightly. "I realized I don't want it. I love teaching. I love working directly with students, seeing concepts click, knowing I'm making a tangible difference in their futures." The self-awareness in her decision impressed me. That's a powerful realization, knowing what actually brings you fulfillment, rather than what others might value or recognize. "I credit you for that clarity," she said simply. "Not because you ever lectured or advised me, but because you demonstrated that it's possible to define success on your own terms. To make choices, based on internal values rather than external validation." Her words reminded me of a quote I had encountered decades earlier, when I was just beginning to forge my own path. "The privilege of a lifetime is being who you are." Rebecca was finally claiming that privilege for herself, recognizing that authentic fulfillment comes not from meeting others' expectations, but from honoring your own nature and values. As winter settled over Millfield, bringing early snowfalls and holiday preparations, I found myself increasingly drawn to the financial literacy program that had begun as James's initiative. What had started as a small pilot expanded rapidly, with community organizations requesting specialized workshops and local high schools expressing interest in incorporating elements into their curriculum. The work energized me in a way that corporate leadership no longer did. While I remained committed to Horizon's continued success, I found deeper satisfaction in directly helping individuals develop skills and perspectives that could transform their relationship with money and, by extension, their life choices and possibilities. In early December, I scheduled a meeting with the board of directors to propose a more formal transition plan. The distributed leadership model we had been implementing was proving effective, with the executive team demonstrating capacity for autonomous decision-making within our established strategic framework. "I'm not suggesting immediate retirement," I explained as we sat around the polished conference table where so many pivotal decisions had been made over the years, "but rather a gradual shift in my role over the next 18 to 24 months, moving from operational leadership to strategic advisory, while developing the educational foundation that's becoming increasingly central to my vision." "Board," Members asked thoughtful questions about succession planning, leadership development, and risk management during the transition. Their concerns were legitimate and expected, exactly the kind of governance oversight I had cultivated during my tenure as CEO. By meeting's end, we had agreed on a structured transition timeline and established a committee to manage the process. I would remain as CEO through the following June, then shift to executive chair while my carefully selected successor assumed day-to-day leadership. By the following year, I would move to a standard board position, maintaining strategic input while focusing my energies on the educational foundation that was taking shape. That evening, I called my nephew to share the board's support for my evolving role and increased commitment to our shared educational vision. "This is incredible," James said, his excitement palpable even through the phone. "With your expertise and connections, we could expand the program exponentially, reach thousands of students instead of dozens." "Let's maintain perspective," I cautioned, though his enthusiasm was infectious. Sustainable growth requires solid foundation, quality over quantity, especially in education. "Of course," he agreed quickly. "But still, this changes everything. Have you thought about formalizing the initiative? Maybe establishing a proper foundation or nonprofit?" The question had indeed been on my mind. "I've begun exploring structural options," I admitted. "A foundation would provide sustainability beyond individual involvement and potentially attract additional funding." "What would we call it?" he mused. I hadn't considered that aspect, the naming of this emerging entity, that represented a fusion of my professional expertise and personal values. "Something that captures the core mission," I suggested. "Not just financial education, but empowerment through informed choice." "The Choice Foundation," James offered immediately, "because that's what financial literacy ultimately provides, the calloused ability to make real choices rather than being constrained by necessity or manipulation." The name resonated instantly, simple, direct, aligned with our fundamental purpose. Not the Finchley Foundation or any other eponymous designation that would center on personality rather than mission. The Choice Foundation offered a clear statement of purpose that could outlast any individual founder or contributor. "I think you've got it," I told him, impressed by his intuitive grasp of the essential concept. "Let me work with my legal team to explore the practical aspects of establishment and governance." The weeks before Christmas passed in a flurry of activity. Foundation planning sessions interspersed with year-end responsibilities at Horizon and family preparations for the holiday. The structured transition I had proposed was beginning to materialize, with key executives taking more visible leadership roles while I gradually stepped back from day-to-day decisions. One afternoon in mid-December, I received an unexpected visitor at my office. Samantha Davis, a former colleague from my early career at Horizon, had recently relocated to Millfield after accepting a position as financial aid director at the community college. "I heard about your financial literacy initiative through the faculty grapevine," she explained after we had exchanged pleasantries. "Rebecca speaks of it with such enthusiasm that I had to learn more." I outlined the program's development and current status, watching Samantha's expression grow increasingly engaged as she recognized connections to her own work. "This is exactly what my students need," she said emphatically. "I see so many making decisions about educational financing without understanding the long-term implications, taking on debt for degrees with limited earning potential, or conversely, avoiding beneficial education because they don't understand available resources." Her perspective added a crucial dimension to our developing curriculum. Financial decisions about education represented some of the most consequential choices young people faced, decisions with ramifications extending decades into their futures. "Would you be interested in developing a specific module addressing educational financing?" I asked. "The intersection with your daily work would bring valuable practical insight." "I'd love to," she agreed readily. and I could potentially integrate the broader financial literacy components into our mandatory orientation for student loan recipients. Catch them at the beginning, before patterns are established. Our conversation expanded to include potential research opportunities, tracking outcomes for students who received financial education compared to those who didn't, documenting best practices for intervention timing and methodology. By the time Samantha left my office, we had outlined a potential partnership between the Choice Foundation and the community college that would serve both educational and research objectives. That evening, as I walked home through gently falling snow, I found myself reflecting on the serendipitous connections that seemed to be multiplying around this new initiative. People from different chapters of my life, family members, colleagues, community partners, were being drawn together around a shared recognition that financial education represented a critical unmet need. The irony wasn't lost on me. For decades, I had built financial security through quiet discipline and strategic decision-making, often feeling isolated in those choices. Now, that same focus on financial empowerment was becoming a point of connection and community, drawing together people who might otherwise never have collaborated toward a common purpose. As Christmas approached, Marcus and Rebecca hosted another family gathering at their new home, more modest than their previous residence, but warmer and more welcoming in its authenticity. The renovations they had undertaken themselves over the summer were complete, creating spaces that reflected actual use rather than impression management. We converted the formal dining room into a study space for Emma when she's home from college, Rebecca explained as she showed me around. Since we actually eat in the kitchen nook anyway, it seemed silly to maintain a room we only use twice a year. The practicality of the decision, prioritizing actual living patterns over conventional expectations, represented exactly the kind of intentional choice that characterized their new approach to life. Throughout the house, I noticed evidence of similar decisions: furniture chosen for comfort rather than appearance, meaningful items displayed rather than status symbols, spaces organized for actual use rather than hypothetical entertaining. As family members arrived bearing modest but thoughtful gifts, the contrast with previous years was striking. Gone were the expensive but impersonal items selected to impress rather than delight. In their place were handmade treasures, experiences rather than objects, contributions to causes meaningful to the recipient. My mother presented each household with a hand-bound collection of family recipes, complete with her handwritten notes about origins and adaptations over generations. Marcus gifted everyone passes to the state park system, promising monthly hiking excursions through the coming year. Eleanor's teenagers had created personalized playlists for each family member, curating music they thought would resonate with individual tastes and interests. When it came time for gift exchange, Rebecca handed me a small package wrapped in simple brown paper adorned with a sprig of holly. Inside was a leather-bound notebook of exceptional quality, its cover embossed, with a single word, choice. For the foundation, she explained as I ran my fingers over the textured surface. I thought you might want a dedicated place to capture ideas as they develop. The thoughtfulness of the gift, its connection to my emerging vision, its quality, without ostentation, its practical utility, perfectly encapsulated the transformation in our relationship. Rebecca had seen me, truly seen me, perhaps for the first time. Not as someone to be pitied or envied, but as an individual with distinct values and aspirations worth supporting. It's perfect, I told her sincerely. Exactly what I needed. Without realizing it. She smiled, the expression reaching her eyes in a way that had become increasingly common as she shed the performance aspects of her former persona. Isn't that the best kind of gift? Meeting a need you hadn't yet articulated even to yourself? Her question lingered with me through the remainder of the evening and into the quiet days between Christmas and New Year. The most valuable gifts, whether material objects, experiences, or insights, are often those that address needs or possibilities we haven't fully recognized. The financial literacy program that had begun as James's project was becoming that kind of gift for me, meeting a need for purpose and impact beyond corporate success that I had felt but not fully articulated. As the year drew to a close, I found myself sitting at my kitchen table late one evening, Rebecca's notebook open before me as I sketched preliminary plans for the Choice Foundation. The transition timeline at Horizon was established, creating space for this new venture without abandoning responsibilities to the company I had built. Family relationships had evolved into genuine connections based on mutual respect rather than judgment or obligation. The path ahead, while not without challenges, felt aligned with my deepest values and capabilities. A text message from James interrupted my planning session. Just heard from the dean. University-approved expanded program for spring semester. 3 additional sections funded. This is really happening. His excitement was palpable even through the digital medium. I smiled, recognizing in his enthusiasm the same purpose-driven energy that had fueled my own early career. The sense of building something meaningful that aligned personal capacity with genuine human need. Congratulations, I replied. Well earned. Recognition for your vision and persistence. I returned to my notes, adding James's update to the foundation timeline. As the clock approached midnight, I realized I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. The particular exhilaration that comes from standing at the threshold of creation, of bringing something new and necessary into existence. Not just a business venture, but a vehicle for transformation, both for others through the education we would provide, and for myself through this new expression of purpose. The Choice Foundation would not erase the misconceptions and judgments of the past. Rebecca would always have years of having mocked my cheap lifestyle before understanding the principles and values that guided my choices. I would always have the memory of being underestimated and dismissed by family members who confused consumption with achievement. But those experiences, properly metabolized, had become valuable perspective, teaching tools that informed our evolving work rather than wounds that limited our possibilities. As the new year approached, bringing with it both the one-year anniversary of the revelation and the formal beginning of my leadership transition at Horizon, I found myself surprisingly at peace with the next chapter. The path ahead wasn't about proving myself or accumulating more wealth, more recognition, more external validation. It was about integration and amplification, bringing together the different dimensions of my experience into a coherent whole that could benefit others while continuing my own growth and development. Rebecca had once mocked my cheap lifestyle, unable to recognize the intentional discipline and value alignment that guided my choices. Now she was an active partner in translating those same principles into educational opportunity for others. The company where she had once worked as a mid-level employee, never suspecting its ownership, was now becoming a platform for broader impact through the foundation it would help support. The ultimate irony, perhaps, was that revealing what had always been true, my ownership of Horizon Dynamics, had initiated a cascade of changes that allowed everyone in our family to live more truthfully, to align their external choices with their internal values, to recognize that authentic prosperity isn't measured by visual signals or status markers, but by the freedom to live in accordance with one's deepest principles. As midnight approached, on New Year's Eve, I stood on my patio watching the first gentle snowflakes of a fresh winter storm. The coming year would bring challenges, certainly: the foundation launch, the leadership transition at Horizon, the continuing evolution of family relationships. But for perhaps the first time, these challenges felt like natural expressions of growth rather than obstacles to overcome or battles to win. Rebecca's mockery of my lifestyle had become the catalyst for her own transformation. My revelation of company ownership had opened possibilities for authentic connection that pretense had previously prevented. What had begun as judgment and misunderstanding had evolved, through honesty and reflection, into mutual respect and shared purpose. The first stroke of midnight sounded from the town clock in the distance. I raised my glass to the silent, snow-filled night, offering a quiet toast to the year ahead, to choices made with intention, to prosperity measured in meaning rather than material, to the continuing journey of becoming ever more authentically ourselves, individually and together. Spring brought vibrant changes to Millfield, cherry blossoms dotting the parks, students spilling onto campus lawns between classes, and the Choice Foundation taking tangible form. After months of planning and legal preparation, we had secured official nonprofit status, assembled a diverse board of directors, and established a physical headquarters in a renovated Victorian near the community college. The Foundation's mission had crystallized around 3 core objectives: providing practical financial education to underserved populations, conducting research on effective financial literacy interventions, and advocating for policy changes to protect consumers from predatory practices. Each component reflected lessons from my own journey and the collective wisdom of our growing team. James had transitioned from student visionary to program director, deferring law school to focus on building the foundation. His natural talent for connecting with young people, combined with his personal experience overcoming financial missteps, made him uniquely effective in developing curriculum that resonated with our target populations. The feedback from the high school workshops has been phenomenal, he reported during our weekly leadership meeting, spreading evaluation forms across the conference table. Especially the simulations where students experience decades of financial consequences compressed into 2-hour scenarios. Rebecca, who had joined our board while maintaining her teaching position, nodded in agreement. Those simulations are transformative. Students see how seemingly small decisions compound over time, both positively and negatively. The foundation had quickly outgrown our initial vision, attracting volunteers, donors, and community partners in unexpected numbers. When the local newspaper ran a feature on our work, complete with a flattering profile highlighting my transition from corporate leadership to nonprofit service, the response had been overwhelming. Former colleagues, community leaders, and fellow entrepreneurs reached out offering support, expertise, and funding. My office at the foundation occupied the Victorian's former library, a wood-paneled room with built-in bookshelves and a bay window overlooking the garden. It felt worlds away from the sleek corporate environment of Horizon, yet the skills honed over decades of business leadership transferred seamlessly to this new context. Strategic planning, team development, stakeholder management. The methods remained relevant while the mission shifted from profit generation to community impact. On a warm Tuesday in May, I was reviewing grant proposals when my assistant announced an unexpected visitor, Sammy Chen, Regional Director of Consumer Financial Protection at the State Regulatory Agency. I had encountered Sammy briefly at industry conferences over the years but had no substantive relationship with her or her department. "Ms. Finchley?" she began after settling into the visitor's chair across from my desk. "I've been following the Choice Foundation's development with great interest." "Thank you," I responded, curious about the purpose behind this unscheduled visit. "We're still in early stages but making steady progress." "More than progress from what I've observed. Your financial literacy curriculum is being described as revolutionary by educators. Several districts are already reporting measurable behavior changes among students who've completed your program." Her knowledge of our outcomes suggested this wasn't a casual interest. "We're collecting data systematically to validate those initial observations," I explained. "Anecdotal success is encouraging, but we're committed to evidence-based approaches." Sammy nodded approvingly. "That scientific rigor is precisely why I'm here. My department has received a federal grant to develop standardized financial education resources for statewide implementation. We're looking for a development partner with demonstrated expertise and innovative methodology." The opportunity she was suggesting, a partnership that could scale our curriculum to reach every student in the state, represented exactly the kind of expansion we had hoped might be possible years down the road. Having it materialize barely 6 months into our operation was both thrilling and daunting. "The timeline is aggressive," Sammy continued, sensing my interest. "Full implementation targeted for next academic year. The grant provides substantial resources but requires matching community investment and rigorous evaluation metrics." By the time she departed an hour later, we had established the framework for a formal proposal. The potential partnership would accelerate our impact exponentially while providing validation that could influence similar initiatives nationwide. It represented a perfect alignment of opportunity with readiness, arriving at precisely the moment when our foundation had proven its concept, but had not yet committed to a specific growth trajectory. That evening, as I walked home through the park that connected the foundation offices to the duplex where my parents and I lived, I reflected on how differently my professional journey was unfolding than I might have imagined even 2 years earlier. The corporate success that had defined my identity for decades had transformed into a platform for different kinds of impact, no less significant, but measured in changed lives rather than profit margins. When I arrived home, I found my parents and Eleanor's family gathered on the shared patio between our units. My father was teaching Eleanor's youngest how to grill vegetables, while my mother and Eleanor arranged a salad harvested from our expanding garden. The casual weeknight dinner had become a regular tradition, family members dropping by whenever schedules permitted, sharing meals and conversation without the formality that had characterized our gatherings in the past. "There she is," my father called as I approached, just in time to taste test my new marinade. The simplicity of the welcome, the assumption of belonging without performance or pretense, felt like the culmination of the changes our family had embraced over the past 18 months. No one commented on my work clothes or questioned why. I hadn't changed into something more casual. No one made passive-aggressive remarks about my schedule or priorities. I was simply Imogene, arriving home to people who accepted me exactly as I was. Over dinner, I shared the unexpected opportunity presented by Sammy's visit. Rather than the polite but disengaged responses such professional news might once have elicited, my family engaged with genuine interest, asking thoughtful questions about implementation challenges, resource requirements, and potential community impact. "This could change how an entire generation thinks about money," Eleanor observed, clearly grasping the significance. "Breaking cycles of financial dysfunction that extend back decades or centuries," my father added quietly. "These patterns often persist across multiple generations until someone disrupts them intentionally." His insight reminded me how profoundly our family's relationship with money had evolved, not just in practical management, but in the fundamental narratives we constructed around wealth, success, and worth. The dysfunctional patterns that had shaped my siblings' early financial choices were being actively replaced with healthier models for the next generation. The following Saturday brought another family milestone, Emma's return from her freshman year at State University. Rebecca had invited everyone to a welcome home cookout, more casual than formal, but infused with genuine celebration of Emma's successful transition to independent living. When I arrived at their ranch house, I found Rebecca in the kitchen preparing a colorful fruit salad. The changes in her appearance over the past year and a half had become so familiar that I hardly noticed them anymore. The simpler hairstyle, the minimal makeup, the comfortable clothing chosen for function rather than impression. What remained striking was the transformation in her demeanor, the relaxed confidence that had replaced her former tightly controlled presentation. "Emma's flight landed early," she reported happily. "Marcus picked her up, and they're stopping for ice cream on the way home. A little father-daughter tradition they started." The warmth in her voice when mentioning this simple ritual contrasted sharply with the status-focused parenting approach she had once championed. The Rebecca who had pushed Emma toward prestigious activities and appearances designed to impress others had been replaced by a mother who valued authentic connection above external validation. Within the hour, the backyard filled with family, members bearing potluck contributions and genuine enthusiasm for Emma's homecoming. When she arrived, tanned and confident from her successful first year away, the changes in her were equally evident. Not just the physical maturation typical of the transition to college, but a distinct sense of self-assurance. As conversations flowed around the patio, I overheard Emma describing her summer plans to Eleanor's curious teenagers. "I'll be interning at the Water Conservation District 3 days a week and working with Aunt Imogene at the foundation the other 2 days, plus helping with the high school workshops when needed." Her casual reference to me as Aunt Imogene, a form of address she had rarely used during the years when Rebecca had maintained careful distance between us, felt like a small but significant marker of our evolving family connection. The ease with which she included both the environmental work aligned with her studies and the foundation involvement reflecting our shared values suggested a young adult developing an integrated approach to purpose and livelihood. Later, as the gathering transitioned from active meal to relaxed conversation, Emma sought me out specifically. "I've been following the foundation's progress online," she said, settling into a chair beside me. "The curriculum materials you've posted are impressive." "Thank you," I replied, pleased by her genuine interest. "James has been the driving force behind those resources." "I noticed his influence," she smiled. "But I also recognized your methodical approach to financial education, building concepts systematically rather than jumping directly to investment strategies like most programs do." Her observation demonstrated unexpected insight into my pedagogical philosophy. That intentional sequencing was something we debated extensively, I acknowledged. Many argued that investment concepts are what attract initial interest. Emma nodded thoughtfully. "But what use is understanding investments if you haven't mastered fundamental concepts like compounding or systematic saving? It's like teaching calculus before basic arithmetic." The aptness of her analogy impressed me. Exactly. We're building a comprehensive framework rather than cherry-picking appealing topics. Our conversation expanded to include her observations from campus, how financial pressures affected her peers' academic choices, relationships, and mental health. Her perspective as a current student provided valuable insight we couldn't obtain from our more removed vantage points, highlighting opportunities to make our curriculum even more relevant to emerging adults. "Would you be interested in helping us develop specific resources for college students?" I asked as our discussion concluded. "Your first-hand experience would be invaluable in ensuring we're addressing actual needs rather than our assumptions about them." Emma's expression brightened. With unexpected enthusiasm, "I'd love that. I've been thinking about proposing a peer financial mentoring program at State anyway. This could provide the foundation for that initiative." As May transitioned to June, the Choice Foundation's partnership with the state regulatory agency formalized through signed agreements and initial funding transfers. The ambitious timeline necessitated expanding our team, drawing talented educators and financial professionals who shared our vision for transforming financial literacy education. My leadership transition at Horizon had likewise progressed according to plan. Anthony Williams, my carefully selected successor, had assumed full CEO responsibilities, while I maintained strategic input as executive chair. The distributed leadership model we had implemented was functioning smoothly, with the executive team demonstrating capability and confidence in their expanded roles. One Wednesday afternoon, I received an unexpected call from Marcus. "Do you have time for coffee tomorrow morning?" he asked, an unusual formality in his tone suggesting something beyond casual conversation. We met at Laurel Cafe, the quiet establishment that had become my preferred meeting spot for conversations requiring privacy and thoughtfulness. Marcus arrived precisely on time, dressed in the business casual style he had adopted since leaving corporate sales. Professional, but unpretentious. After brief pleasantries, he reached into his messenger bag and retrieved a manila envelope. I wanted to discuss this with you before making a final decision, he said, sliding the envelope across the table. Inside was a job offer, executive, Director of Youth Development Programs for the county's Recreation Department. The position would formalize and expand the volunteer work Marcus had been doing with disadvantaged teens, providing structure and resources for initiatives he had been developing independently. They approached me last month, he explained. Apparently, the mentorship program I've been running caught their attention. The salary is significantly less than my corporate position, but with our reduced expenses since downsizing. It's feasible, I finished for him, understanding immediately. And it's meaningful work aligned with your genuine interests rather than just financial compensation. He nodded, relief evident in his expression. Perhaps because I had grasped the essential components of his decision without requiring extended explanation. Exactly, but I wanted your perspective before committing. You've navigated major career transitions successfully, maintained financial stability while pursuing meaningful work. Your insight would be valuable. The request touched me deeply, not just because Marcus was seeking my professional guidance, but because it represented a profound shift in our sibling relationship. For decades, Marcus had maintained careful distance from my career advice, perhaps perceiving it as implicit criticism of his own choices or fearing I might judge his financial decisions. Now he was actively seeking my counsel, acknowledging both my expertise and his respect for my perspective. From what you've shared, this role aligns perfectly with your evolving priorities, I observed after reviewing the details. The compensation is reasonable for the sector. The scope allows you to expand work you're already passionate about. And the institutional backing provides stability without excessive bureaucracy. Marcus listened attentively, his expression thoughtful rather than defensive. Those were my conclusions as well. Rebecca fully supports the change, especially with her teaching position now secured for next year. Then it seems you found your next chapter, I said simply. A way to translate your natural leadership abilities and interpersonal skills into meaningful impact for young people who need exactly those influences in their lives. The genuine smile that spread across his face confirmed that he had indeed found his path, not because it offered prestige or status, but because it represented authentic connection between his capabilities and genuine human need. The brother who had once defined success through luxury cars and impressive addresses had discovered more meaningful measures of achievement and contribution. As June blossomed into July, the Choice Foundation celebrated its official opening with a community gathering that filled the renovated Victorian and spilled into its gardens. Local officials, educators, students, and family members mingled in spaces designed to foster both learning and connection. Display tables showcased our curriculum materials, research initiatives, and partnership opportunities. In my brief remarks at the ceremony, I emphasized the Foundation's core philosophy. Financial education isn't about accumulating maximum wealth. It's about creating maximum choice, the freedom to align your resources with your values, to weather unexpected challenges without catastrophic disruption, to build security that supports authenticity rather than appearance. Looking out at the gathered crowd, my parents seated in the front row, beaming with quiet pride, Marcus and Rebecca, standing together near the refreshment table, their expressions reflecting genuine engagement. Eleanor and Todd with their increasingly independent teenagers, James confidently explaining program details to interested community members, Emma distributing materials she had helped develop for college students. I felt a profound sense of integration. The family that had once been fractured by financial dysfunction, judgment, and performance had transformed into a community of mutual support and respect. The wealth I had accumulated through decades of disciplined choice had become a platform for impact, extending far beyond personal comfort or status. The professional expertise developed through corporate leadership had found new expression in nonprofit service and education. Most surprisingly, Rebecca, The sister-in-law who had once mocked my cheap lifestyle with such confident disdain, had become not just an ally, but a genuine friend. Her journey from materialism to meaning, from external validation to internal purpose, paralleled the transformations occurring throughout our family system. As the celebration continued around me, I stepped away briefly to the quiet of my office. Through the bay window, I could see the garden where James was leading an impromptu workshop for a group of interested teenagers, using the financial simulation game that had proven so effective in our high school programs. His animated expressions and the students' engaged responses testified to the authentic connection forming around concepts that could potentially reshape their financial futures. The path that had brought us here, from Rebecca's mockery to mutual respect, from misunderstanding to collaboration, had not been linear or predictable. It had required vulnerability, willingness to reconsider deeply held assumptions, and courage to choose authenticity over appearance. Yet the transformation had created possibilities none of us could have imagined when the journey began. I returned to the gathering just as Rebecca was concluding a conversation with the superintendent of schools. When she spotted me, she crossed the room with purpose, her expression thoughtful. "I've been reflecting on something," she said when she reached me. "That day in the conference room, when I realized you owned Horizon, it wasn't just shocking because of the revelation itself. It was shocking because it forced me to confront how profoundly I had misjudged what matters." I nodded, understanding exactly what she meant. We all create narratives based on visible evidence. You saw my apartment, my car, my practical lifestyle, and constructed a story that made sense within your value system at that time. "But I was so certain," she said, shaking her head slightly, "so convinced that visible prosperity was the only meaningful measure of success. I didn't just misjudge your financial situation, I misjudged your entire approach to life. And now?" I asked gently. She gestured around the room, at the foundation space alive with purpose, at our family members engaged in meaningful conversation, at the educational materials designed to transform financial futures. "Now I understand that what you were building all along was freedom. Not just financial independence, but freedom from others' expectations and judgments. Freedom to create exactly this kind of impact when the time was right." Her insight captured precisely what had guided my choices throughout my adult life. Not deprivation or excessive frugality, but intentional decisions aligned with core values of independence, sustainability, and eventual impact. The cheap lifestyle Rebecca had once mocked had been the visible manifestation of a deeper philosophy she could not perceive until her own values began to shift. The greatest irony, I reflected, is that your mockery ultimately created this opportunity for impact. Without that moment of revelation, without the transformations it catalyzed throughout our family, this foundation might never have taken shape. Rebecca smiled, genuine warmth reaching her eyes. "Then perhaps I should mock your lifestyle more often." We both laughed, the shared humor possible only because we had traveled so far from the relationship dynamics that had once defined our interactions. The sister-in-law who had judged my choices and the corporate executive who had kept her success private had both evolved into something more authentic, more integrated, more capable of meaningful connection. As twilight settled over the foundation's inaugural celebration, I found myself standing on the Victorians' wraparound porch, watching fireflies begin their evening dance above the garden. The path ahead held challenges and uncertainties, certainly, curriculum to refine, partnerships to nurture, research to conduct, lives to impact. But it was a path aligned with my deepest values, surrounded by family members and colleagues who now shared a common vision of prosperity measured in meaning rather than material. Rebecca's mockery of my cheap lifestyle had become the catalyst for her own transformation. My revelation about company ownership had opened possibilities for authentic connection that pretense had previously prevented. What had begun as judgment and misunderstanding had evolved, through honesty and reflection, into mutual respect and shared purpose. The legacy I was building now was not measured in dollars or possessions, but in changed perspectives, in financial futures not yet determined, in family relationships transformed from performance to authenticity. It was a legacy of choice, the freedom to define success according to personal values rather than external expectations, the capacity to align resources with meaning rather than status. As I turned to rejoin the gathering, I caught sight of Rebecca across the porch, engaged in animated conversation with a group of educators. Our eyes met briefly, mutual understanding passing between us without words, acknowledgement of how far we had traveled from that moment of revelation in the conference room, gratitude for the unexpected journey that had brought us here, recognition that the most valuable transformations often begin with moments of profound disruption. The woman who had once mocked my lifestyle now championed the values that had guided my choices all along. The company where she worked had become a catalyst for community impact rather than just corporate profit. And I had discovered that the most meaningful prosperity comes not from what you accumulate, but from what you create. The choices you enable, the perspectives you transform, the possibilities you unlock for others. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up, just click and check them out.